So, traditional Jewish, Christian, and Muslim.
Hello, Elder Meyer. Brother Meyer.
See, I go by brother all the time. I haven't gone by elder in more than a decade.
All right. Well, you'll have to explain that too on this episode of
The Holy Watermelon Podcast.
I got my time in the sun years ago when we did our atheist episode. And today, you get your time in the sun.
We've talked about Christianity a fair bit.
That's true, but not Mormonism.
Yeah. So this is the tradition that I think it's fair to say I grew up in it. Not as a young child so much, but as a teenager.
All right. I mean, it's what you're definitely most familiar with.
Yeah.
So that's cool. We took a lot of notes, so I'll just say right now, this might be a two-parter. I know we did that a lot back in the day, thinking we had so many notes, and then they never were, but this one actually is like twice as long as most of our show notes. So we'll wrap it up if we see fit. And there might be a second part.
To be determined.
TBD. We'll see how long we talk for. So I've always liked Mormonism. I won't say I'm a pro or an expert, but I've read a lot about it.
Sure. And of course, we've talked a little bit about the foundational text of this movement just a few weeks ago.
And then, yes, we've talked about Christianity broadly, but not, this is the first time we're getting into any sort of denomination, which is fun.
Yeah.
And there'll be more of these in the future.
Of course. Let's start on Sumbawa Island in Indonesia.
That doesn't sound right, but okay.
In April of 1815, Tambora volcano erupted in the greatest volcanic explosion in recorded history at that point.
Wow.
Yeah. The following summer, Tambora's cloud of ash and sulfuric acid hit Europe. You know, crossing Asia, crossing northern Africa a little bit, and caused such terrible weather that Mary Shelley and her friends had to stay inside and tell ghost stories for entertainment. And that's how we got Frankenstein.
Cool.
And then across the Atlantic Ocean from there, Joseph Smith and his family had to leave their failed farm in Vermont to go to New York because the weather was so bad that they just couldn't grow anything. And so this is seen as divine intervention, moving Joseph to where he would begin a great movement, religiously speaking.
Mormon.
Yes, the Latter-day Saint movement.
So we should post this on our Discord. We might have done it at the time it came out, but in 2022, they released a daguerreotype of Joseph Smith, which is pretty cool. Someone was sitting on that for a while.
Yeah, I don't think we have posted it, so we'll have to do that. It's hit the news as, oh yeah, this is definitely Joseph Smith. There remains doubt.
Still some doubt. I mean, he looks like the paintings.
Pretty close, yeah.
Yeah.
It's...
But everyone looked the same back then.
Everyone looked the same, eh?
Yep.
I've seen enough photographs of people from the 1840s that I have to disagree.
All right. No.
Joseph Smith's great-great-grandson, Daniel Larson, inherited a locket in 1992 and didn't manage to get it open until 3 years ago, apparently.
He probably just didn't care about it for a really long time.
Well, he tried, couldn't get it open, and he just put it down.
Yeah, that's why he didn't care about it for a long time.
Yeah, it completely slipped his mind until 2020. He doesn't have any solid evidence that it was Joseph Smith Jr., but he's pretty confident now. He and the community of Christ generally will tell people, yeah, this is Joseph Smith. The Brighamite Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints from Utah is officially uncertain, but unofficially an awful lot of people are like, oh yeah, this is definitely him, and we're going to treat it like it's him.
I mean, like we talked about, I think it was last episode, the LDS Church has been the victim of forgeries, so I can see why they're withholding a official, because they did that before and then we're embarrassed.
Yeah.
That means Daniel Larson's my sixth cousin 5 times removed. 4 times removed.
3 or 4, yeah.
Yeah. Cousin Joseph and Cousin Brigham. I was telling Preston before we started the show.
Yeah. In fact, you are as closely related to Joseph Smith as Brigham Young was.
Wow.
Minus the generation gap.
I love it.
Yeah. Which, was many generations.
Yes. I think we're
before a
7
common
times
ancestor.
removed, 6 or 7 times removed.
Yeah.
Anyway. So Joseph Smith's religious background, how did he end up? I'm not going to say starting a new religion because nobody starts a new religion, but the Second Great Awakening was a Protestant revival that occurred between 1790 and 1840 in the United States. So many religious reform groups popped up during this time, including Adventism and, of course, the LDS movement. And this was the time period in which Joseph Smith lived in New York State, as Preston mentioned. So I'm not great on all the different types of theology, so feel free to jump in, Preston. But this is apparently the time for post-millennialism to thrive. And post-millennialists believe that Christ will return after a long period of peace, and therefore they spend a lot of time trying to clean up society so he can come back.
Well, I would say that's the general idea for millennialists. Post-millennialists are more about, Jesus is here.
Okay.
Which you'll see a lot more famously among Jehovah's Witnesses.
Right.
Yeah. But there were lots of people talking about it at this time.
Right.
That, hey, maybe we missed this huge world-defining event.
So Joseph grew up in a family that was religious, but not particularly loyal to any one group. His parents actually disagreed on what religion to follow, and I put religion in air quotes because these are all just different types of Christianity at this point in time.
Generally speaking, at this point in history, when people talked about religion, they were talking about different
flavors of Christianity, which is makes me giggle. But so they were swept up in the excitement of this revival, and Joseph said he became interested in religion around the age of 12. Not just Joseph, but allegedly his entire family believed that they received dreams or visions from God.
I mean, not his entire family, but definitely an awful lot of people in his family.
And grandparents, yeah.
Yeah.
My point being, he's not the only.
Correct.
Not the only one.
And, this was happening all over the place.
Right. Because of the revival.
Yeah.
Joseph liked the Methodists, but about half of his family joined the Presbyterians.
Yeah. Joseph's mom became a Presbyterian officially. Joseph Sr., Joseph Smith Jr.'s father, I don't think he actually committed to any church either. I couldn't find anything, but maybe I didn't dig deep enough.
I just know he didn't like his wife's church.
Yes, he definitely was not a big fan of the Presbyterians.
So,
but I didn't find anything that said he joined the Methodists or the Baptists.
Yeah.
When Joseph was 14, in the spring of 1820, he was really concerned about this whole revival thing. So, famously, Joseph had his first vision, more of a visitation, the way he described it, when he was 14 in the spring of 1820. He was really concerned about all this idea of, you got to join a church, which one to do? Everyone's trying to get my attention. And so he went into the woods to pray. And after struggling to pray, he finally saw God and Jesus Christ as separate people. And they told him, don't join any churches.
Wow.
That the church that Jesus had established only existed in crude parodies with no authority or fully apostate institutions. And so it was just a bad idea to join any of them. Sit tight, you'll get more later. Because, you can't tell a 14-year-old it's time to start a new church. That doesn't work.
A little young. Yeah. Joseph continued to study with the Methodists and occasionally the Presbyterians and Baptists, but he never actually joined any of their congregations.
And then, about 3 years later, as we've talked about in our previous Book of Mormon episode, in September 1823, he received another vision, this time from an angel named Moroni, who appeared to him in his bedroom and kept him up all night, which is a little annoying. But through several visitations throughout the night, he told him that he would find some gold plates with Moroni's assistance, which contained the stories of the inhabitants of America hundreds of years earlier.
Joseph found the plates, but wasn't allowed to remove them from that hiding place for another 4 years. And as Preston mentioned, we're not going to get into the details of the Book of Mormon because we did that in a previous episode not long ago called Plates of Palmyra.
Yeah. If you want to pause now and go back to that, that's fine. If you want to wait till later, that's fine too.
Yeah.
After publishing the Book of Mormon, Joseph actually officially, formally started a church in April of 1830. They weren't terribly different from a lot of other churches. Their biggest thing that made them unique was this Book of Mormon. That is a divinely revealed text. Mormons also believe that Jesus is a fully distinct individual from the Father, as opposed to what you'll hear some churches saying, well, Jesus is the Father in an incarnate form. It's
the very confusing Trinity.
Yeah, not all Christian churches believe in the most confusing possible form of the Trinity, but it does exist in some churches. Latter-day Saints teach that they are fully distinct, that he is, in every reasonable way, the Son of the Father. The Father is usually referred to as Elohim, which is found in the Hebrew Bible just as the word for God, but it's a pluralized form, which is usually treated as just an honorific plural. It's funky language business. And that the Holy Spirit is a third distinct personage. They're all gods, perfectly united in their mission relative to humanity.
So would you consider Mormonism polytheistic?
The way I look at it is more henotheistic, or maybe even cathenotheistic.
I literally just transcribed an episode where we talk about this, and I don't remember the difference.
So henotheism is...
Henotheism feels wrong.
It's the acknowledgement that there are multiple gods, but with a focused worship on a single God.
So the Church of Jesus Christ.
The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints acknowledges that there are many gods.
God the Father.
That pre-exist God the Father.
Okay.
And that exists elsewhere that don't matter to our particular covenants with God. And that our finally focused worship is actually on Jesus Christ.
I keep raising my hand just for our listeners. I have questions.
Yeah.
Sorry, you were going to explain cathenotheism. I'll come back to my question. Okay. Sorry.
So cathenotheism is the idea that fine focus of worship can actually move from one person to another. And the principle that plays on in Mormon theology is the idea that when all is said and done, all of the stewardship that is held in Christ over everything on this planet will be transferred to the Father in the next covenant, whatever shape that takes. So you could say that Mormonism is cathenotheistic rather than monotheistic or Trinitarian or even henotheistic. What's up?
What do you say to people who say Mormons aren't Christians?
I like to point out that the name of the church is the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and that we put all of our biblically based covenants between us and Christ.
One more question, and maybe there's a better spot in the episode for it, but Church of Jesus Christ, there isn't much of a focus, I find, in Mormonism on the sacrifice. You don't see any images of the crucifixion in your world, whereas I look at Catholics or evangelicals where they talk about he did it all on the cross. But you guys really don't have that kind of
So we do talk a lot about the sacrifice.
Okay.
But the crucifixion is,
horrifying.
Theologically speaking, the least significant of the entire situation. The Gospels tell us that Christ suffered in the Garden of Gethsemane. He suffered such intense pain that he bled from every pore, which, speaking biologically, would mean so much pain that your blood pressure pushes the blood out of your body through non-conventional means.
I'm pretty sure that's possible too.
It is possible.
Horrifying.
It is possible. It's not been recorded a whole lot, but I have personally experienced blood pressure high enough that the EMTs were worried that I would die.
Okay.
And that was because of pain from a gallbladder infection. So to imagine somebody suffering such intense pain that he bleeds in a way that it looks like he's sweating blood, the way it's described in the Gospels, that's pretty intense. But biologically possible, though it would kill a lesser man. It would
He manned up.
kill most of us. Yeah. We might see a few references to the Book of Mormon musical today.
That's a conservative estimate. Let's just say that.
And so that suffering is something that is interpreted as being hugely important to us. And then the death on the cross is simply a mechanical necessity to get himself to the point where he is dead and can be raised from the dead.
Okay. Cool. I mean, not cool. Poor JC, but
It's a bad time.
it is a bad time.
Suffered more than you could really effectively imagine.
Let's talk a little bit more about the doctrines and practices.
Another really important thing, we talked about millennialism. Within the Latter-day Saint movement, it is generally understood that Jesus will come back to rule the world in partnership with good mortal men.
Nice. And I guess this is the postmillennialism. This is literally what the latter days refer to. Correct? That we are living in the end times.
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay.
Yeah, that this is a later time than the last time Jesus set up his church.
That is what latter means.
Yeah, that's it.
Tomorrow.
And then the baggage that this word carries with it is that, in theory, we're getting close to the end.
Tomorrow is the latter day.
Yep. The most important thing that makes this religious movement different from all of the others, apart from the things that really identify Christ and the Book of Mormon and all of that, is the idea that family relationships are meant to be eternal.
Oh, maybe we'll link to this. I found an interesting YouTube channel. Maybe we'll even reach out to them at some point. An interesting YouTube channel researching this. And it's an evangelical pastor working his way through Mormonism, which I think is pretty cool because I imagine historically, like evangelicals in the Catholic Church, I imagine evangelicals and Mormonism don't get along particularly well.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, he was talking to his Mormon friend about heaven and how they both picture it differently. And it was just like a really interesting conversation where like this evangelical pastor says like, my promise to my wife is till death do us part. And while I'm sure I will see her in heaven, it won't be in the same unit that we
You'll
have
just
here on
be
earth.
all equal brothers
Yeah,
and
and
sisters.
I'll be happy to see her, but we will not have this. Yeah, anyway, carry on. I'm curious.
It's got hope to it, but it doesn't have as much hope as the idea that families are meant to be together forever.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a great, forgive me, selling feature of
Right.
Mormonism.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course you want to be with your family forever.
Yeah. And you alluded to the different way that we see heaven. There's an understanding of how God has salvation planned for all of humanity that is pretty important to the Latter-day Saint movement. The idea that there is not a simple binary of heaven where you're in a choir versus hell where you're just tortured in a pit of fire forever. Both of these ideas are actually completely rejected in Latter-day Saint theology. That there's heaven, and for some reason we've leaned hard into the old Latin language of the celestial kingdom,
Right.
the heavenly kingdom.
Yeah.
And this is where people who keep their covenants in every aspect of their lives are meant to be. Of course, people are imperfect, so there's ways that we work on the whole keeping covenants business. But there's that heavenly kingdom for everybody who is a covenant keeper. And the Latter-day Saint movement has layers on layers of covenants too. And then there's the worldly eternal kingdoms, the terrestrial and telestial, weirdly named after the gods Terra and Tellus, both goddesses of the earth. And these are for people who are less valiant, but are still at their core at least decent human beings. They're just maybe not interested in keeping specific covenants, whatever that may be. And so it's still it's considered heaven the way we talk about it, even though it's less exalted.
Yeah, I mean, the way you described it to me once is that everyone is going somewhere better.
Yeah.
Even the worst people on the planet are going somewhere better than Earth. They just don't get to hang out with you guys.
Right. I've had people feel really bothered by this idea that God would put barriers between people because of how they acted in life. But if somebody says, you know what? Yeah, I know what eternity's like, and I still want to hurt people, gated community sounds like a good deal.
I mean, yeah, we have those on Earth too.
Yeah. And there's a little bit of mystery around this idea that's sometimes called outer darkness. Sometimes it's called hell. Sometimes it's just the unknown. That is for those people who are literally the worst.
Hitler.
There's really, I would say, zero chance that even Hitler is counted among the people that fit into this category.
Wow.
The way that theologically this is explained for this outer darkness is that it's reserved for those people who can look mercy in the face and call it a lie, to receive a knowledge of God through the Holy Ghost and then say, I don't want that. So you have that option to go somewhere else. It's a little dark, and one could hope that even Hitler would say, you know what, salvation sounds great. That doesn't mean that he would be welcome in any specific community, and to make specific judgments on that would require a lot more knowledge than any one of us has.
Yeah, I mean, it's all conjecture right now.
Yeah. To say that a mass murderer can get into the best part of heaven it's offensive to a lot of people. And that makes sense that it would be. But there's a principle written right into the New Testament that judgment is for God alone. And there's no way that this whole program exists without lots and lots of therapy for literally everybody. And if you're the kind of person who takes joy in killing people, maybe you won't have any interest in that sort of therapy and you just don't belong in the best kingdom. Saying, yeah, I believe in Jesus has never been enough. Life is more complicated than that.
I mean, and that's talking about serial killer going to heaven. That's always been offensive to me. It's like, I live a good life. I know I'm a good person. So just because I don't believe Jesus, Son of God, I'm going to burn in hell forever. That's more offensive to me than...
Yeah.
Yeah. You're picking up what I'm laying down.
Yeah. No, the Latter-day Saint theology, especially this idea of demarcations of kingdoms, makes an awful lot of sense to me.
All right. The Latter-day Saints Church has 5 major sacraments, which I'm sure Preston's much more experienced on than I am, but I'm going to give it my good old college try.
Go for it.
Every major sacrament of the church must be preceded with an interview, and I believe minimum with your bishop.
Yeah.
And then some of them your stake president.
Yeah. A stake president, since we haven't introduced this idea at all.
I was just going to say it. Mormonism is the only, one of the few religions that divides up its congregants geographically, which I think is pretty cool. So you go to your church based on where you live, and that's your ward. And then, like, we have counties and states and countries, or towns and provinces and countries. Mormons have wards and stakes. So a stake has several wards. You have a stake president.
Yeah.
So they all go to church geographically, which I think is kind of cool.
Yeah. For larger areas, a lot of churches will be worried about geography. But yeah, it's uncommon for us to have actual boundaries geographically.
Yeah, I guess Catholic churches have parishes, but other than that, like...
But you can choose which parish to go to.
Yeah, right. I could drive across town to go to church if I wanted to, which I don't. But
yeah.
Anyway.
And so back to these sacraments.
Yes. Every sacrament is a covenant with specific demands, which I assume we'll get into with these notes.
Yeah, pretty much.
So the first one you'll do is your baptism. And it is a full immersion baptism in a baptismal font. And you have to be at least 8 years old. Mormons don't do infant baptism because of the interview process. Infants are not great conversationalists. But you also have to know what you're being baptized for.
You're right. And then you're not quite right.
Oh, okay.
The interview isn't the reason why we put the line at 8 years old.
Well, no, I was being a little bit cheeky, Preston. I know infants can't be interviewed.
Baptism, I mean, it is a covenant, so that's important. You've got to have a level of maturity. And in Latter-day Saint theology, the atoning sacrifice of Jesus just automatically covers literally every young child. Oh. That if you die before it would even make sense to be baptized, there's no reason you would go to hell for not being baptized.
That's kind.
Yeah.
Because that's cruel.
Right?
People who believe that.
Yeah, it's a little problematic.
Mormons are also known for baptisms for the dead.
Yeah.
I also learned in my research that any of these covenants can be performed for the dead. So sealings for the dead. I didn't know that. Yeah. Which we'll get into what sealings are in a moment. But lots of people know about baptisms for the dead, where you are baptized on behalf of a dead person. It's in the name.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if it was that obvious, fewer people would have really weird ideas about what goes on in the temple. I've heard people accuse Mormons of taking dead bodies into the temple and dunking them, which is so gross.
No, if you've been baptized, you can you can be rebaptized for a dead person.
I mean, there's more steps there, but yes, I'm sure that is one of the prerequisites.
So I even remember your wife talking about, like, as a kid, just going and basically getting baptized for fun.
I wouldn't say for fun.
But that's just something they did as kids, was get rebaptized.
Well, not rebaptized.
Well, rebaptized on behalf of someone.
You're doing it for yourself.
Right. Yeah. But not their first kick of the cat.
Right. Yeah, anyway, there's another step after the baptism.
We're not done talking about baptism. Okay. I do have to point out, because it was pretty bad, that the LDS Church got in trouble for baptizing Holocaust victims without their family's permission.
Yeah, that was a pretty big headline for a little while.
Yeah, so now you need permission to baptize a dead person.
Which is definitely the way it should always have been.
Right. I highly recommend you check out some photos of temples and check out the baptismal fonts. They are, I assume all of them, are placed on the back of 12 oxen.
All the temple baptismal fonts are, yeah.
And this is to represent the cleansing pools outside of the temple in Jerusalem.
Yeah. Anytime that they're done in the temple, it's in that kind of visual context. It's kind of cool.
Yeah.
But when you're baptized for yourself as a living person, it could be anywhere. Rivers are great, lakes, pools, whatever. An awful lot of church buildings will have little fonts in them for this purpose, though the number of buildings being built with these seems to be decreasing. In fact, a lot of buildings are having them removed. So when you're a kid going through your baptism, do you go to the temple? I guess some of it will depend where you are geographically. Only baptisms for the dead. You will never be baptized for yourself in the temple. Only baptisms for the dead. Okay, cool. I didn't know that. To participate in this ordinance for a dead person, you have to be at least 12 years old. Okay. Usually. I think we're getting a little softer on that line, but that's still the magic number. Now, would an adult do that? Like, would you? Yeah, that still happens. Okay. Yeah. Adults, when they go to the temple, will often go and do other work that has a higher minimum age. Right, which we'll get into right away. So following baptism, whether for the dead or for the living, there is a ritual of confirmation where the person is officially made a member of the church. Does this happen like immediately after baptism? Like they dry off with a towel and then you get confirmed? Or is this like years later? I couldn't find anything. I just said after baptism. In a lot of churches, you will see confirmation is years later. Okay. In the LDS tradition, it's usually the same day or the next day. So dry them off with a towel. Okay. Pretty much. I mean, you let them go get changed, get into their own comfortable clothes. No, I know. But and then somebody with the Melchizedek priesthood, we'll talk a little bit more about that later, lays their hands on their head, confirms them a member of the church, and they tell them to receive the Holy Ghost. And then another blessing can follow that, but that's basically the core of it. Yeah. So when you receive the Holy Ghost, is this where you can get revelations from God? Sure, yeah. You wouldn't typically get it before? Anybody can receive a manifestation of the Holy Ghost, but through this command to receive the Holy Ghost and the confirmation, you are entitled, as long as you are living your life right, to have the continual companionship of the Holy Ghost, is the doctrine attached to that.
Okay.
After a new member is confirmed into the church, the sacrament of the Lord's Supper, what might be familiar to most of our audience as communion, though is the only ordinance in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is actually referred to as a sacrament.
Okay.
It is taken almost weekly to renew covenants because we are imperfect and we screw up and we got to recommit to doing our best.
All right. I'm going to let you talk about this one exclusively, priesthood ordination, because I'm sitting next to a priest.
Yeah. So the priesthood is almost always limited to men. There have been exceptions. Some women have been ordained to the priesthood, a lot more commonly in the smaller splinter groups of Mormonism. Yeah.
Is there an internal movement to get women into ordination? I've seen a few things online. Yeah. It feels very contentious.
Yeah.
Okay. So we'll just leave it there?
Yeah.
Okay.
We'll just leave it there for now. There are two distinct priesthoods in the LDS tradition, and both have actually changed a bit internally over the years and continue to do so among the smaller breakaway groups.
The Aaronic priesthood. I just like the names.
Yes, the priesthood of Aaron is the lesser of the two priesthoods. It's treated as a preparatory priesthood, and it is not conferred in the temple for the dead. All priests in the church have this line of priesthood, and it's mostly used for dealing with preliminary and public ministerial rites. A priest can perform a baptism. Priests will bless the sacrament of the Lord's Supper. They can't perform confirmations or really have the most important administrative roles in congregations.
And when we say administrative roles, does this is the calling that you get, like your callings? Like you,
no,
if you
that's
only
different.
Oh, okay, but if we were just in the priesthood of Aaron, your calling wouldn't be affected though, right? You wouldn't be a bishop.
So that's a funny technicality. Every bishop has the Melchizedek priesthood,
right.
But the office of bishop is actually an Aaronic priesthood role. And so that is the exception to that.
Okay, so I literally picked the worst example I could have.
Because everything is complicated.
Okay. But you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Right, like we have a friend that was a clerk. I imagine if you
got to be an elder.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. You do get what I'm saying.
Yeah.
It's just I picked the worst example ever.
All of the Aaronic priesthood is subordinate to the priesthood of Melchizedek, also known as, and less often, as the holy priesthood after the order of the Son of God. That's a mouthful. It's a lot easier to say the Melchizedek priesthood.
I'm not going to lie, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints really likes wordy titles.
Yes.
And it's going to get worse later on.
So I used to work for a guy who would send his tithing checks directly to church headquarters.
Like in Utah?
Yeah.
Wow.
And because he just would not send it to the local branch president. And so the payee line was the corporation of the presiding bishop of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. You
know, most banks aren't that picky.
It's awful.
My real name's Catherine, but I can absolutely cash a check as Katie. Just saying. You know, most banks are not that picky.
Yeah, it's a thing.
To write the tiniest writing ever or get massive checks.
Or you just get a stamp, make sure it's typed properly.
My goodness, yeah.
So to receive the Melchizedek priesthood today, you must be at least 18 years old. There have been exceptions to this. In the days of Brigham Young, there was no set age on when you could receive the priesthood.
There were a lot of things that Brigham Young didn't have set ages for.
Brigham Young made a lot of weird choices. Yes. And the youngest apostle ever ordained was Brigham's son, who was ordained at 11 years old. We don't usually ordain deacons that young.
I was going to say that's the same age as his wife.
I don't think he ever had a wife that young.
14.
that's a few years different.
I know, but not much.
It's not much better.
Not much better.
And so the Melchizedek priesthood is the primary administrative priesthood. And the vast majority of men in the church are elders in this line of priesthood.
So really, you'd have the priesthood of Aaron if you were under 18. Would kind of be the...
Well, and you don't lose that priesthood when
Right.
you receive a new one.
Right, but
Yeah.
just if you're over 18, you'd have both in most cases.
In most cases, yeah.
And so the only ones who would have the priesthood of Aaron would just be young men.
Yeah. So I've been a priest for, what years? 2023. I was made a priest in 2005. So I've been a priest for 18 years.
Wow.
And I've been an elder for, I guess, 15 or 16 years now. Yeah.
All right. I'm the high priestess of the Holy Watermelon. So that's been almost 3 years. Suck
Yeah.
it.
So after the priesthood, and every now and then you'll hear people talk about how once you've been ordained an elder, you have all of the priesthood. And even though that's been said over the pulpit, it is factually incorrect. One could even call it a lie.
No.
Because the fullness of the priesthood, according to Joseph Smith and most people who talk about it since then, say that the fullness of the priesthood is in the temple. That what we have in the temple is primary purpose, even though we do work for the dead for those preliminary sacraments of the baptism, confirmation, and ordination. The endowment is what we call it, where you receive gifts in sacred tokens. And these are really the keys of priesthood. Without these, you've got very little. And they're modeled in the form of an ancient mystery school. That's really the only way I can describe it in a way that's terribly meaningful without giving it in full detail.
Which you're not supposed to.
I mean, the only things that I have to keep secret are the very specific small collection of details that I have promised to keep secret.
Right. So there's also, and you jump in at any point, expert, but symbolic washing and anointing happens and members receive a new name, which I'm pretty sure is one of those things you don't talk about.
Yeah.
And then signs and tokens are shared with members that they promise not to reveal.
Yeah.
When people, our friends, say they went to the temple, is it them redoing the endowment ceremony?
Yeah.
And
Yeah. So the first, just like everything, the first time you do a thing, you're doing it for yourself.
right.
And then you have the opportunity to take care of this for people who have not had the opportunity to have it done for them in their lifetime.
So would you ever, I guess, like just do it? Or there's always has to be a dead person attached to it?
Yeah, you actually have to go through with a specific name, whether it's your own or
So you
somebody
could
else's.
go through again on your own behalf?
No.
No. So,
No,
okay.
you get to go through it for yourself once, and every other time you get to be reminded and learn something new maybe, but you're doing it on somebody else's behalf.
So like how many times would you have done the endowment ceremony in your last?
That's a great question.
Like, is it something, I guess my question is it something you do regularly or like annually or like one and done?
Some people don't go terribly often. Other people go every month or every week.
But then you always have to be finding new people?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
So if you haven't done the research to get a whole bunch of your own family members and names to go through the temple with, there is a huge archive of people who have been researched by others that you can just take one of their names through.
So that's really interesting. So I always knew Mormons were big into genealogy, which is why I know Joseph Smith is my cousin.
Yeah.
And I always thought maybe it's still true that Mormons have so many kids that because you marry other Mormons, there's some, inbreeding you have to be concerned about, especially if you're a geographical Mormon,
Sure, I get you.
If you're Nauvoo, you better know who's related to you. But it's for this.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, the genealogy is so important to the church because...
So you can go through the temple.
Yeah, so that we can get ourselves connected all the way through back to Adam, which I've done in exactly one line that is not really reliable.
I mean, I wouldn't think you're reliable.
Yeah, so I've got my family history done reliably back to William the Conqueror.
Nice.
Who claimed biblical lineage, which once you're connected to any biblical figure, bam, the work is already done.
Everyone, well, I guess Noah lived. I was like, it wasn't everyone wiped off the planet after Noah. So you're related to Noah, who is related to Adam.
Yeah, and that line is already solved.
Okay. Perfect.
Yeah.
We got, so there's a great, I'm just going to take a minute for genealogy timeout. Theme song. The LDS Church has a great, if you're like an ancestry.ca person, I actually highly recommend the LDS one called Family Search. Mm-hmm. Unlike ancestry.ca, and there's pros and cons to both, is that if someone's already researched your family member, they'll just pre-populate your tree, which is really cool.
You just gotta connect.
Yeah, whereas if ancestry.ca, you have to kind of do it all yourself. So on my side, which is where this has been great, I found someone that was already researched. I had reason to believe it was reputable based off of name and date of birth and date of death. And it connected me quite far back, all the way to European royalty, but Joseph Smith, Brigham Young, Barack Obama's my cousin, no big deal. Hey, Barack. Because one of these people obviously came from a Mormon family. Mm-hmm. Or else I wouldn't be related to Joseph Smith. But
right.
And because it was connected to a Mormon family, I had researched really, really far back. I actually got my husband all the way back to the year 100. I mean, again, there's some dubiousness. Some dubiousness, especially when you hit like different royal lines. Like he was, Vikings. I'm like, do we really have this much information on the Vikings to say he's... Anyway, but very cool. Highly recommend. And yeah, if you hit royalty or a Mormon, the work's basically done for you.
It's pretty great.
Haven't been that successful in other lines of my family, but that one Mormon line related to a lot of cool people because of it.
Yeah.
Anyway, including, and I just want to clarify, Barack Obama being my 8th cousin doesn't make us that close at all. So
you're closer to Joseph Smith and Brigham. Right.
My husband is my 10th cousin.
Okay.
But like,
10th cousin's pretty safe.
Pretty safe.
I mean, you can safely breed with your first cousin for one generation. You don't want to keep it going for more than one.
Anyway, so cool little diversion into genealogy from the endowment ceremony. But now we're going to talk about marriage or sealing. So when Mormon couples want to be together forever, sealing ceremonies are performed in the temple. And this can happen as part of a wedding or even decades later. And this means that your marriage and family can join you after death in heaven. And you can also, so it happens a lot at marriage, but you can also seal your children's to parents.
Yeah. So this idea that families can be together forever is optional. It relies on the consent of all parties involved. Cases of abuse mean that even though we do the ceremony, that doesn't mean you're going to want to be with that person forever. And that's fine. There's the trust that God's going to sort all that stuff out later. But because we want to be with our families forever, we do a little bit of supposing that past generations will want that as well. And yeah, genealogy, hugely important.
Is there anything you can share about your sealing publicly to your wife?
I mean, the ceremony itself is nothing terribly dramatic or impressive. Oh. You kneel across the altar.
You hold hands?
Yeah, hold hands, share a promise. It's really about it.
All right.
It's nice and simple, but it's a pretty pleasant experience.
And because it's in the temple, only other card-carrying Mormons can witness that. So your friends and family that aren't allowed to just stand outside
and wait for the showering of praises and whatnot.
All right, so we're going straight from these 5 sacraments to polygamy?
Well, I mean, we just talked about marriage. We got to talk about the tricky bits that people have been talking about.
Multiple marriages.
Yeah. And I've put a little bit of thought on how to word this.
I do like your example.
I mean, it's a perfectly solid example that if a man's wife dies, as they well might in childbirth, he has historically always been encouraged to take another wife. The promise of eternal marriage turns serial monogamy into eternal polygamy. assuming that the women in question consent to stay with the man. This understanding, combined with the regularity of polygyny in the Hebrew Bible, was enough to overpower the prohibition expressed in the Book of Mormon against polygyny.
So the Book of Mormon actually...
The Book of Mormon actually says don't take more than one wife.
Interesting.
Yep.
And we know the Hebrew Bible says take more than one wife.
Well, it says you can. It doesn't say you must. It says you can. We got things like levirate marriage, where a man marries his brother's wife if his brother didn't actually have any children with the wife. And the way it's framed is that the children of this levirate marriage don't belong to the biological father of the children. They are the children of the first husband who died childless.
Right. And
that fits in a pretty reasonable way into this Latter-day Saint understanding of marriage being eternal.
And I mean, the levirate marriage was to look after the woman who was now left alone.
Yes, that was another part of it as well, to continue protecting this person who is now part of your family.
And because women couldn't look after themselves back then. Until like the 1970s, they couldn't look after themselves. With any.
Can they now?
Wow. I need you to leave.
Bye.
Bye. Preston is dead. So welcome to the new series, The Holy Watermelon Podcast. You're a little shit. But I love this example you put in our notes.
Yeah, well, so the idea became a problem in the Latter-day Saint movement that good men should have more blessings. This idea turned into they should have more wives. Brigham Young famously had at least 56 wives. You can't have a good relationship with all these women. That's not how this works.
I mean, even if you think of, again, the levirate marriage, you can't even look after 56 people effectively. Well, I know they range.
Financially, he actually did really well.
Oh, wow. Wasn't the tithing?
Well, he was governor of the Utah
Territory.
Territory, that's what it was called. Yeah, territory. And so that made him a lot of money, too.
Oh, okay. Still, 56 is a lot of people to care for.
It is. It really, really
kids.
is. Plus kids. Yeah. It's crazy. But anyway, 2 wives is fine for some. It's easy to argue 2 could be good, fine, whatever. More than 4 is haram in Islam for good reason. That there's no way you can have a satisfying relationship with your husband while basically competing for time. Even if you're not competing for love, you're competing for time with several other women. That sounds awful.
Well, that's why the sister wives died. His marriage is all dissolved.
Uh-huh. That makes sense.
Because he spent too much time with the most recent one. And
I mean, I understand the appeal of spending a bunch of time with the most recent. I get how that happens, how that works.
But basically, all the other wives were like, this is bullshit.
Yeah.
And they all dissolved. Yeah. Yeah. So he did that at 4, I believe, was his.
I don't know. The idea of having 4 wives, you can't really divide your time in a nice way with 4 wives.
I think I don't know if challenge is the right word, but like the thought exercise around polygamy is like, I absolutely believe that there are polyamorous people in the world. There's 7 billion people on the planet. Oh, yeah. There are people who are polyamorous.
Yep. Does it work for everybody?
Right.
No.
So there's a difference in being polyamorous and participate in a polygamous marriage. And I think like watching something like Sister Wives, there's lots of shows like that out there. They probably aren't polyamorous. They're trying to fulfill a biblical rule.
But people who genuinely are polyamorous could really enjoy a good polygynous marriage.
Absolutely. And then there's also this like patriarchy of it's always a man with multiple wives and not women with multiple husbands.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And again, so in like true polyamory, there'd be more flexibility than what we typically see in this fundamentalist.
Well, I don't think it's a difference between true polyamory and polygyny, but there's one specifically accepted form of polyamory is basically the deal.
But again, if you ask them, are you polyamorous? I don't know if they would be polyamorous. Again, they're just being
Well, so
They want to live a certain religious life.
for the most part,
As
yes.
opposed to being, like I said, genuinely. It's like, yeah, no.
There are women who are okay with sharing and women who will accept sharing.
Right.
And then
yeah,
there are
that's
women who are like, no, this is the way I want to live.
Yeah.
And the last category is not a whole lot within this particularly specific religious community.
Right. All right. So when you try to reform religions, because like you said, Joseph Smith didn't start a new religion. He was just a reformist. You're not that popular.
Yeah. Yeah, things didn't go well for good old Joe.
You know who else wasn't popular when he tried to reform a religion?
Jesus.
Jesus Christ. He was a Jew, let me remind you, and he was reforming Judaism.
Well, trying.
And kind of failing, actually.
I mean, he had a good following, according to the books that we have, and history shows that he ended up leading a world-changing movement.
Yeah.
But
He didn't reform Judaism. He just created a religion.
Yeah, he created a splinter group, which is always the way it works.
Right. And so Joseph Smith was no different. At this point in Mormon history, they are jumping around the country to find safety and establish a Mormon community. And Joseph's last stop in his lifetime was Nauvoo, Illinois, a town that today only has about 1,000 people, but is still an important Mormon landmark.
Yeah.
Now, the Nauvoo Expositor was a newspaper with only one issue, and that issue bashed Joseph. It criticized the polygamous practices of the church at the time, called for reform within the Mormon religion, and implied that Joseph wanted a theocracy.
Yeah, I mean, to back up this idea that I don't think is really entirely true, this desire for theocracy, he did announce that he was running for president of the United States in the 1844 election. And it turned out to be a very tight election.
Wow.
And maybe if he had been allowed to run, it wouldn't have been so tight. It's hard to say how many votes he would have got. There were about 2.3 million voters.
That can't be all the population of America at the time.
The world population in 1844 was really a small fraction of what it is today.
I guess so. I guess we've had 200 years to fill it up.
Yeah. And the reason he wanted to run for president was to resolve some injustices that he'd experienced. After years of persecution, he reached out to President Martin Van Buren to say, hey, we need help. The Constitution says we're free to be any religion, but our neighbors say, no, you can't be Mormon. And Van Buren said, you're on your own, guys. So Joseph was like, if I can be president, I can make sure that everybody's got religious freedom. Which, who knows how that would look.
Well, we still haven't
Great
had
power can be a problem.
We still haven't had a Mormon president, but we got really close.
We got really close with Mitt. And who knows what that would have looked like.
No. I mean, could it have been worse than Trump? Probably not.
Right?
Anyway, Joseph didn't like this newspaper, and he called for the printing press to be destroyed, as did the Nauvoo City Council, because they all like Joseph.
Of course.
This is pretty short-sighted because they didn't think that destroying the printing press would cause more harm than just letting the newspaper be published, let the controversy and scandal happen, and let it die down.
It would have been so much smarter to sue for slander than be imprisoned for vandalism.
My notes say hint. It did cause more good, bad than good. So basically, everyone called on their militia groups to start fighting. So the publisher, the Nauvoo Expositor, Joseph Smith, and Carthage officials all called on their militia group. So Carthage is a slightly larger neighboring town in Illinois at this time. Joseph Smith and his brother Hiram McDaniels, the five-headed dragon. Joseph Smith and his brother Hiram were arrested and charged with inciting a riot. However, those charges were eventually increased to treason.
Yeah, that's big.
Yeah.
Hard to argue, but they went for it.
Yeah. Willard Richards and John Taylor, early LDS leaders, willingly joined the Smith brothers in jail. On June 27, 1844, a mob attacked the jail where the Smiths, Richards, and Taylor were held, and Hiram was killed early on as he tried to secure the door. Joseph was standing in the window when he was shot, and he fell from the window and died after hitting the ground.
And that could have been the end of the movement. That's what some people were hoping.
I was going to say, and that's how you make a martyr.
Right.
Which is what they did. And so we're at an hour. I think it is a good time to break.
And we're actually going to do a two-parter. We've talked about
this actually happening. So in our next episode, we're going to talk about the splinter groups within Mormonism as well. We're going to talk a little bit about Brigham Young and the development of the church in Salt Lake City, and
a little bit more about the temple.
About what happens inside the temple, the mysterious temple. So stay tuned. 2 weeks' time.
All right. So, of course, you can find us on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube,
Patreon, Spreadshirt,
Discord. Patreon and Spreadshirt, though, are great places where you could give us money in exchange for goods and or services.
Yes. To keep this podcast going, we're about to hit our 3-year anniversary, and we'd love to go for another 3 years, but we do need some help to do that. So we'd love your support, either in the form of social media follow, a review on Apple, or a purchase on one of our platforms.
Patreon.
Thank
you so much for joining us.
Peace be with you.
By the late Middle Ages, the Christian Protestant had fulfilled its